good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last webinar of the LPEA for this season at least. Last but not the least, we are here together to spend about an hour with, I have to say, humbling range of experts coming from the venture capital scene, all members of the LPEA. So I want to start by welcoming Mark Tluszcz. Hi, Mark, from Mangrove Capital that you founded.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Thanks for having me today.
We'll talk a bit more about each of you, but just want to say hi to Debbie as well. Debora Dumont, doctor from Bioqube. I think you're on mute.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here.
Thank you. And Catherine Boule from CapDecisif, now Carista, I should say, right,
yeah.
Catherine?
Yes, thank you. Hi everybody.
Okay, and last but not least, we have Dr. Xinhong Lim from Vickers Venture, who leads the biotech and health tech team. So also to mention, you're based and represent different continents. So I think we covered the globe between all of you. I have to thank Xinhong for joining us from California. The rest of us are in Europe, but I think you have quite enough of global knowledge to share with us today. You know that the topic is about this race to a COVID-19 vaccine, which is not the least topic, especially given the current news. I just want to highlight a few facts about you. Mark, I mean, everybody knows you as the co-founder of Mangrove, the first investor in Skype, but also the chairman of Wix, which is now in 13 billion market cap. So again, congratulations. You're a regular feature on our webinars and a very popular one. But this doesn't preclude you from investing in life sciences to some degree.
Right.
Okay. Catherine, I mean, very humbling to speak to you because you started your career at the Institut Curie in France, which everybody knows as being very advanced in many fields, but yourself are specialized in molecular biology as a researcher. And you've been a managing partner of CapDecisif, which is a very well-reputed healthcare and health tech fund in France. And since now almost 20 years, although you're still very young. So that's... and Debbie, you told me you had moved to the dark side of the equation after having been in the real life of pharma to set up a Bioqube, which is based in the Benelux, focusing on biotech and the incubation model that is quite unique in the industry, although that's not the only thing you do.
Indeed. Very proud to have launched our new biotech fund a couple of weeks ago. Really focusing on...
That's true. Congratulations. Okay, and Xinhong, you represent Vickers, which has been around for 20 years and voted one of the most consistently performing venture funds in the world by Prickin. You lead, as I said earlier, everything related to health, to biotech and health tech. And we invited you because you are very close to the topic today. But I should also say that you are the recipient of a National Award Medal for Scientific Achievement by the government of Singapore. So
thank you.
I will try to keep up with all of you because, you know, we are trying to do here something for Dummies 1.0 when it comes to biotech. And the reason we are hosting this as a closing webinar is because everybody's very worried as well with what's going on now, what looks like a second wave coming to us in certain clusters and even now a little bit in Luxembourg. And I would like, as an introduction, before we deep dive into the topic, to tell us a little bit your feeling about what's going on generally with this wave of infection, and also in terms of the audience who are with us today. Please make sure to ask questions because it's quite unique to have so many experts united on one place and in one time. So please do post your questions at the bottom of the screen, and we will need to wrap up before 5:30. So depending on how many questions come online, I may interrupt the debate. And to our panelists, please feel free to disagree with each other, to interrupt each other. Let's be as interactive as possible. So Mark, why don't you start with what you feel is going on right now in our societies?
Yeah, so, you know, the advice that I'm giving to the companies I work with and my teams is don't expect a vaccine anytime soon. You better start practicing social distancing in a big way. We're seeing it all over Europe as we've come out of deconfinement, particularly the 18 to 25-year-olds have gone out and partied like crazy. And we've seen it here in Paris and Brussels and Lisbon, all sorts of places. And so that there will be a second peak is pretty clear in our mind right now. But you better know that it's coming, and don't be hoping for a vaccine anytime soon. The second thing I'd say.
Great start.
The second thing is, even if there is a vaccine soon, and I might be completely wrong, of course, on these things, because it's, who knows, right? But even if there is one, the reality is its efficacy will likely be lower than a normal vaccine, just because it's been rushed through. And the second thing is, we don't know the purity of it, right? So before I take that vaccine, whenever it is, I'd rather social distance. So that's a bit my grim message of today. I don't see a whole lot of things than your own personal behavior. So
well, Mark,
a lot of research being done, a lot of research is being done, a lot of people are saying a lot of positive things. And I think here I try to put on my realistic hat and say, put your mask on, social distance, you'll be safer.
Thank you, Mark. I think you'll be our weird checklist anyway, because you like to portray yourself as a contrarian who enjoys weird ideas. So let's say this is the first one for the day. Okay. No, we don't want you to be wrong. We want you to, argue your position, and it'll be very interesting. Xinhong, I saw you react to what Mark said. What does this inspire you?
Yeah, I don't think it's contrarian at all, to be frank. I think unfortunately, this has been predicted. Basically what we're seeing now is waves of suppression, right, that result in spikes of virus outbreaks, and then followed by some containment. And then when the virus dies down, people sort of let down their guard, and the outbreak spike again. And this was predicted in various models, and various epidemiologists have basically seen this coming. Unfortunately, what this means, I think, in the macro context, is a pessimistic impact on what's going to happen to the global economy, because optimal suppression in a way that actually maintains hospitalization rates below the capacity of the ICUs is going to take years, and this is going to really lead to a deep and sustained global recession, and potentially even a depression. And so we give our companies the same advice, that it's time to batten down the hatches. The medical countermeasures, there's been a lot of progress. There's been a lot of effort to try to bring things through. But as Mark has pointed out, I think the efficacy is likely to be patchy given the data that has emerged to date. And beyond that, just production capacity is limited. And so the scalability of many of the approaches currently is questionable, regardless of the best efforts. And so I think we need to prepare to be in this for quite a while, wear masks, batten down the hatches, and prepare for continued storms ahead.
So we start with the consensus of the first two speakers, but I wanted you to comment on the social distancing versus reconfining. But let's go back to this, because I want to hear our ladies on the panel. Debbie, what's the view from the Benelux and Bioqube?
Considering we're a new fund, so we haven't made any new investments, but of course we know a lot of the companies, and we're seeing a lot of companies in the deal flow. So we see that the current impact is really that there has been some form of delay, either in preclinical development, but we really expect that the biggest issue for the industry, that there will be the impact of the delay in clinical trials and the knock-on effect on milestones and future financing rounds of these companies.
Yeah, and Catherine?
Yeah, in fact, I'm sorry, but I totally agree with all the discuss. So first of all, even if we have a vaccine before or at the end of this year, probably we will live with this virus for a long time, because nobody will have a dose probably before 1 year or two. So we will be with this mask and etc. and social distance for a while. I think it's not very happy, but it's probably like that. And on the other side, I agree with Debbie. For the biotech part of our portfolio, the main issue is the clinical trial and the management, but we will come back on that. And on the other side, on the digital part of the healthcare companies, so digital health companies, it was more an opportunity to sign new clients, new customers. So everything is not black or white. Of course, it's gray.
Sure.
And,
so we should we all prepare for remove everything then? Remote everything, sorry, not remove. remote everything. And I want to seize this transition to let you speak a little bit about what your companies are doing in terms of your portfolio, and especially those more or less early or late stage that have to do with the life sciences and health tech. Mark, do you want to tell us a word about K-Health and any other endeavor you have in the space?
Yeah, we've made, over the last couple of years, half a dozen investments in the space. I'd say we have 2 star companies, but I'll talk about the one I prefer. We always have a favorite, right, in these things. We have a company based out of Israel and New York called K-Health, and it's an artificial intelligence doctor based on 3.5 million patient records, a lot of data from doctors. And essentially what it does is it's a chatbot that gives you a very strong analysis of the symptoms that you have and says, based on the symptoms that you have, here's what other patients in our database had, here's how they were treated. And for us, it's a race to bring general medicine like that down to zero, because my view is it's knowledge today, and computer models are probably likely already ours is as accurate as humans, but I think these computer models very quickly are going to be more accurate than humans. And it's how we bring general medicine to billions of people who today can't afford to go see a doctor. So I think this revolution in health tech and digital health is real. It's going to be long lasting, and it's a good place to put some money. But that's kind of my view on that. It's all about how you bring knowledge to people who don't have knowledge. I was telling a journalist the other day that the only place I feel stupid in life is when I go see my doctor. And that's because he or she can tell me anything that they want. And I'll likely take the pill and take the advice, right? And sometimes I want a counter check to that. And I think software will help that.
Agree. You agree, Catherine?
Yes, of course.
What about you at Vickers?
So at Vickers, our strategy has been to invest in breakthroughs that are highly defensible and address large global problems. Fortunately, this has meant that our portfolio, I think, has weathered the storm pretty well. The impact on most of our companies has been neutral. We have had companies like RWTC, which is developing the world's first commercially viable biodegradable plastic. So addressing the plastic disposal problem that remains pressing in the world, and in fact is becoming more severe in these very troubled times, given that everyone has to work and eat and live very much in situ, and consuming more and more plastic packaging than ever. So fortunately, they've managed to close a very large funding round. They announced 133, but they've closed 142 million round, even during the midst of this pandemic. And of course, the impact actually on some of our portfolio companies, especially the life sciences company, has been actually very positive. I think our life sciences companies have never received this much attention. And some of our portfolio companies are actually at the forefront of addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, including a company called Emergex. Rajaa, you're very well aware of this company. We have talked extensively about it, but they're developing a contrarian approach to vaccines that everyone else, more than 140 publicly known vaccines, almost everyone is pursuing antibodies. But
I want to get to this later, Xinhong, because first I want to get a bit of an overview of what you're all doing, and then I think all of you will have a view on the different approaches, if you don't mind. What I wanted to hear from what you said is the fact that it seems like healthcare, health tech is a defensive sector, and this could be one of our conclusions already. It's a sector that actually benefits plenty from what's going on. And because a lot of our members and investors ask us, where are the opportunities going forward? So let's see, what does your pipeline look like, Debbie? Are you going to invest in vaccine-related startups, or actually not, because a lot of the attention is diverted to COVID now?
So what I find the most striking is the number of COVID developments that pass by in our deal flow. And it appears that a lot of companies have pivoted into COVID development. So we set the bar very high when evaluating such cases, as we believe that companies should only do this where it makes sense. So of course, if you already have a platform that would enable therapeutic vaccines, we fully support the shift toward COVID. But we do see a lot of other companies that are taking a very opportunistic approach. So we're very careful when evaluating such drug development cases.
Yeah. Catherine, I don't know if you have a comment on this. Otherwise, I'd like to deep dive into what's going on in the vaccine sphere.
Yeah, just for a word, we invest just now in a fund dedicated to digital health. So we are not in vaccines companies, but we have some earlier portfolio companies that had some programs into COVID. So we are aware of what is going on.
But you know, you all agreed on the fact that we won't have a vaccine or not a fully immunizing one by the end of the year. So can you tell us where are the bottlenecks actually sitting? You mentioned a little bit production, you mentioned clinical trial limitations. Where is the problem really? Is it because we don't know anything about this disease or not as much, or is it because it's, I mean, we haven't had enough patients tested? Who can start? Maybe Xinhong, you're the, and then Debbie.
Yeah, happy to. So I think Rajaa, I think you actually summarized it pretty well. It's all of the above. It's production challenges, it's emerging data about the disease and how it's transmitted. It is bottlenecks in terms of how the outbreaks are occurring all over the world and whether or not we can get access to sufficient patients to do the trials. But it's also, I think, fundamentally that we feel that people have been pursuing an approach that is not likely to be very effective, actually, for countering RNA viruses. The focus on antibodies has been shown repeatedly to be not effective.
But can you go back one step? Tell us what's going, because I think we do know there's 140 initiatives going on listed by WHOs. What are these guys doing overall? I mean, if you try to be, it's for dummies 1.0. We're not biotech experts here.
So I would say in the broadest strokes possible, almost every method is focused on inducing antibodies that will bind to the outside of the viruses or various virus components and prevent them from entering the cell. This is the broadest stroke that you know we can paint them. There are many different methods that people are trying to use to achieve that. Some of them involve synthetic means, including everyone has heard of I think Moderna, the efforts by Moderna to use mRNA.
That was going to be one of my questions because they're worth 20+ billion. They must be doing something right.
It's I think it's you know, certainly I think there's been a lot of interest in what they've been doing and a lot of hope riding on the valuation that they have been given. Many have said that the hope is running ahead of the reality, and I think that is reflected in the fact that the data that they have produced to date, I think, is equivocal, both in preclinical, the actual data that they have published, as well as the data that they have publicly announced by press release. And I must say that I'm not a fan of science being done by press release.
Okay, wait, I want to ask, I see Dr. Dumont reacting there. What do you think, Debbie, about what Xinhong is saying about Moderna?
What I would like to add is that they have taken a very aggressive approach. I think that 2 days after the publication of the sequence of the virus that they already filed a patent. So they're taking a very aggressive approach. And of course, they already had a track record in demonstrating in the clinic that their approach could be efficacious. And I think that's also the explanation why we see front runners. There are a lot of companies that already have experience that have shown a track record in successfully launching an antiviral approach or a vaccine approach. And I think that's the reason why you see Moderna as a front runner.
But the fact that their vaccine platform is based on antibodies, is it something you find attractive or more agree with Xinhong?
Yeah, maybe I'd like to comment there because I agree with Xinhong. We are somewhat flying blind with respect to COVID because the COVID virus has left the virologist puzzles on different aspects. So as Xinhong already indicated, for most of the known viruses, the immunity is created via antibodies. But for COVID, we are starting to learn much more. And what we see is that an induced antibody response is only short-lived. So we already see a decline of these antibodies already after 3 months. So patients that have been infected with COVID 3 months after the cure, or when they are healthy again, these antibodies start to disappear. So we now know that apparently also T cells, that other part of the immune system, play a very important role. And this could mean that other companies with vaccine approaches that do not only focus on antibodies, but also on T cell immunity might have a unique selling proposition.
And out of the 140 initiatives, how many follow T cells versus antibodies?
The proof of the pudding is in the eating. So some of them claim to have a preference or to induce also T-cell immunity, but they will have to show that during clinical trials that it indeed is the case. So
yeah, I want to add to that, Deborah, and thanks so much for that. And you know, I want to add first of all that almost some of the, I think one report that came out over the weekend was this. I think many people have seen this. Is the viruses induce the cells to produce these tentacles that help them reproduce, and so the viruses are actually being transmitted from in a cell-to-cell manner, which means they never actually get into the circulation. And this is actually how many of the RNA viruses transmit.
RNA, Xinhong, I have to stop you. You use too much jargon. RNA for them. You're too smart for us.
No, and I need to stop myself, please. And thank you, Rajaa, for doing that. Because I meant viruses such as the coronavirus or flu, even, they transmit from cell to cell. And antibodies work when a virus is outside of a cell. And so if the virus is being transmitted from a cell to cell via tentacles, then antibodies are simply not going to be effective. And this is consistent with the fact that with coronavirus, what we're seeing is that patients can recover with little to no neutralizing antibodies. There are many patients who develop antibodies when there is no virus in the blood. And so this really suggests that, again, the immunity is likely not to come from antibodies, but actually rather from T cells. And in fact, the data that is now emerging is showing that even a memory of infection with another related virus, like a coronavirus, another type of coronavirus, which are very common, they cause like 20 to 30% of colds, right? That is sufficient to confer immunity, even to the cells to be able to recognize this COVID-19. So T cells are truly powerful. We believe that the data is mounting that will suggest that this recovery, as well as long-term immunity, is likely going to be coming from a T cell focused approach. And you know, given that everything now has been focused more on antibodies, and you know, this means that the first may not be the best.
So does that also explain the delay to get to a proper vaccine as well? And I don't understand then why is everybody so excited about Moderna, and why the BARDA, which is the American agency that funds healthcare, has been so bullish about them and their likes based on antibodies. Mark, I see you want to say something.
No, I think what you're seeing is a general phenomenon of people confusing hope, strategy, and execution, right?
Okay.
Everybody is hoping that there's going to be a short-term solution, but the reality is a vaccine is not like making a milkshake, right? It's slightly harder. And this is why making vaccines takes usually a long time.
But don't we say now that the likes of the FDA and other authorities are speeding up approvals and ramping up studies?
Well, again, don't confuse hope and true strategy, right? At the end of the day, before we're going to put it into Rajaa's arm, right, the FDA is going to want to be sure you're not going to get something else from this.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of people hoping for this to go much faster. You see, when we talked about Moderna, to pick one, their stock price is way ahead on the same hope, right? That they may be the first one in the market.
And why is that? You know the IPO market very well and the listed world very well.
Public markets always value companies for the future. They don't value them for today, right? So you're buying the stock for future performance. And so they built into the price that this vaccine might work. But I think the broader picture I'm trying to say here is that where everybody is hoping for this to work, and the reality is it's much more difficult than the common person knows, right? And the common person is hearing on the news the FDA and Donald Trump and I don't know who's saying it's coming at the end of the year. The reality is it's not, and that's what we've all said from the beginning. Is it's going to take longer, it will be less efficacy, and it will be likely less pure. So
let's talk about the steps maybe in the descriptive manner, because not everyone is aware. I mean, I'm sure most of the viewers have heard about phase 1, 2, 3, but typically how long does it take for each phase and what do they each validate? I'm sure one of you can explain that, maybe Debbie or Xinhong or even Catherine.
Yeah, so maybe I can jump in and just maybe talk about, and the clinical trial phases are going to differ based on disease indication. But for vaccines, I'll maybe try to provide a breakdown of the conventional timeline. Vaccines have sort of been the persona non grata, I would say, in the drug development industry, right? Because unit economics have been challenging, development timelines have been long, and this is, I think, manifested in the timelines needed for, say, phase 1 to 3. The typical development timeline is a phase 1 safety trial, which often involves, say, 30 to 50 people. This can take anything from several months to a year, and depending on the ability to recruit patients. And sometimes these could be done in non-endemic regions as well as endemic regions, because the readout may be different. So subsequent to that, if the vaccine is found to be safe, the vaccine moves on to phase 2 of trials, where it can then go into hundreds of people, or thousands even, potentially, depending on what is being tested. This will typically be what you call a dose finding study, where they try to determine what will be the effective dose for inducing an immune response, as well as an immune response that is protective and that is durable. But that's not the final word. This vaccine will then need to move into phase 3 study. So phase 2 will take, say, again, anything between 2 to 3 years, potentially, conventionally, right? And phase 3 can involve tens of thousands of people for regular vaccine development. Take maybe 4 to 5 years, if you're optimistic. And that will be an efficacy study to show that the vaccine provides protective immunity. And in the gold standard cases, it provides sterilizing immunity, meaning that it provides immunity that not just allows a person not to get sick from an infection, but also that it prevents it from, the person who has been vaccinated from spreading the disease to others. And unfortunately, many of the vaccines that we're seeing, as Mark has already alluded to, I think some of them may have the ability, I think if given at sufficiently high doses, to induce an immune response that may actually help to alleviate some of the severity of the disease, as we are seeing from some of the preclinical models, but don't seem likely to provide sterilizing immunity, meaning that they will still allow the person to get infected and transmit the disease to others. So the whole process can take easily 10 years.
Great. That's very encouraging, Xinhong.
Everybody is desperate now.
Yeah,
but
of course, you said this is not conventional. So what happens in a non-conventional situation like now, and what strikes all of us in the normal people's world, is how political this has all become. So is this good or bad? And maybe Catherine, because you've worked with the governments closely, and Sanofi, Macron, they're all very proud of announcement of billions of dollars being invested for production facilities. What do you make of this?
I agree with Xinhong, and I think it could be worse because it could be longer, or you can never have a vaccine too. It's the case for the HIV, for example, but we don't talk about that today. And on the other side, I also agree with Mark, because the problem is to give some hope to the people. Nobody wants to live with masks all his life, so we need to have some hope to go out again and to leave the mask, etc. So of course they are all very happy to announce a lot of different things. First is Emmanuel Macron, but he's not alone to announce that he put a big check on the table for having the first vaccine from Sanofi, etc. Hopefully we will have we will be very happy to have that, but be careful in this period. There's a lot of announcement.
But what worries us is, imagine someone finds something interesting or something disastrous, let's say in China. Will they share the results willingly? Will there be a political push or some sort of regulatory rule that forces these labs or research platforms to disclose their results, maybe to cooperate together? And then for those of us watching who are investors, will they be able to make a profit from this, or will governments impose the pricing? I mean,
it's already the case. Today,
it's already the case?
Because during the COVID crisis, there's a lot of helps from governments, especially in France, but I think it's everywhere same thing. There's some regulatory opportunity to move on faster than ever in a clinical stage for new products. with perhaps less data, preclinical, etc., data that asks usually asks, and that's why there's a lot of biotech companies that move on clinical to try if their product could have an impact, etc. There's also some financial opportunities to do that. Some help, some grants, a lot of subventions have been.
Well, I think European Union launched a public effort that raised over 9 billion. So who's going to decide how this money is spent? And are the different regions competing with each other to be first? And do we actually talk to China about what's going on?
Good question.
I think we should stop the webinar. It's going to depress everybody even more.
Okay.
But Debbie, what is Benelux doing in this space? And I know you're beyond Benelux, but tell us your view on this political dimension of COVID race.
Maybe I would like to make one comment, Rajaa, on the entire process. So there was, in April, there was a very interesting interactive article in the New York Times, where you could actually see the conventional timeline for a vaccine development. And this was supposed to take us until 2036, if it would have been a conventional way. And then you could indicate different parameters you could change, and actually shortening the timelines towards, let's say, June 2021, which appeared to be a feasible date for a first vaccine development. So what was striking is, of course, the different parameters. That the most impact was actually, when do you start building manufacturing capabilities? And in a conventional way, you would only start building these manufacturing facilities upon a positive phase 3 trial. What we're now seeing is that pharma are willing to take the risk and already start now with ramping up of the production for a potential vaccine. So
but is it their money or money they receive for free from the government or BARDA? Or
combination? It's a combination. It's really combination of the really impact of the pharmaceutical company that is willing to do so, and different grants, different subsidies, either through government, either through Bill and Melinda Gates, different associations. So this is really a public-private effort, I think, to really make sure that the process is being speed up. Yeah.
I mean, I think that certainly many companies are still watchfully waiting, right? I think that it really, in terms of going full speed into building these large manufacturing capacities, many are still sort of pivoting existing capabilities that they already have to grow large amounts of virus. And I think that's, but the rest are still sort of waiting and seeing if the proof of concept is achieved.
Yeah.
The
timeline. Yeah.
Absolutely, no, I completely agree. And you know, I think that's why, to be fair to Moderna, right, there's so much interest and hope in approaches like Moderna's, synthetic approaches, because
again,
indeed,
stupid question. Tell us what synthetic is, just in case.
So I would say, again, broadly speaking, many virus vaccine approaches either involve a virus itself. So you have to grow actual virus, and then people either modify the virus to make them relevant to COVID-19, or, and this is something that's pursued, say, by Oxford, Jenner, and AstraZeneca, what you call a recombinant virus, or they can take the actual COVID-19 virus and then inactivate it in some way, make it weak. And the classical gold standard vaccine has been an actual live virus that has been evolved over like thousands of generations to become very weak in humans. So as you can imagine, growing large amounts of virus involves basically babying cells in these huge bioreactors, in some cases, or incubating them in eggs, as is the case with the flu vaccine. And it takes up a lot of space, it takes up a lot of resources, and it's very difficult to scale. The reason why I think people are excited, folks like the Gates Foundation and many, of course, in the public, excited by approaches such as Moderna, is that you can actually, instead of taking the whole virus, we take the key aspects of the virus. So imagine your face, right? When your iPhone recognizes your face, it doesn't require your entire face. It only requires 30 points on your face, right? And that's what many of the synthetic approaches are essentially doing. They're taking the 30 points of the virus and coding them into some sort of biological code that they can deliver to cells and program them to be able to recognize a virus when it sees it. So it's like programming my phone to recognize my face. we are programming with a synthetic approach cells to recognize the virus.
The advantage of that is that it's therefore safe for humans then to test this, or what is it?
Yeah, it's much safer because it doesn't involve any virus. It's much more scalable in terms of production and delivery, and it is much quicker to design and implement as well. That's it for not every synthetic approach will meet all these different criteria. So for Moderna, for instance, the code that they're using to program the cells is RNA, which is actually very unstable in the natural environment. And so they need to keep their code, the vaccine has to be stored at a -80°C. And this, I think, presents lots of logistical challenges, both in production and transportation and administration in the clinic. And, especially in a global pandemic situation, access to vaccines is key. And this may sort of impede the uptake and availability of the vaccine, especially in the developing parts of the world.
Xinhong, could you tell us about your company? Your vaccine company, which is doing synthetics. Tell us about that one, because it's an alternative to Moderna, right? So give us an alternative to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So instead of focusing on this antibody induction, we're focusing on programming the immune system to recognize the virus via T cells, which is the other arm of the immune system. These T cells, again, as I said, there's a lot of evidence emerging that they are important for recovery as well as for long-term immunity. What they do is that they recognize cells that have been infected, and then they kill those cells. And there's evidence that such T cells that are virus specific are around even 17 years after the initial infection. And this is data from SARS. So instead of delivering the code via a very fragile medium such as RNA, we're delivering it on gold nanoparticles studded with proteins of the virus that are then specific to train the immune system to be able to recognize this. So what we do is that we can, for naive populations, boost the levels of T cells in a way that there's a baseline that enables infected people to be able to ward it off immediately. For people who have been infected, it actually boosts the diversity of T cells that are able to recognize and respond to viruses. And even for people who have recovered, these vaccines that they have can act as boosters. So this company called Emergex that's based in Oxford.
I want Debbie to react on this, because you're looking at a lot of similar initiatives, Debbie, and this is the place to be politically incorrect, contradictory. We are among ourselves, and I don't think Moderna is watching this, nor the government of whoever.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. So I'm a true believer in the importance of the T-cell immunity. So any company that could generate data and actually show the data that its therapeutic approach is working on this T-cell immunity, that would be something I would have a deeper look at.
Okay, well, I don't want to focus too much on that, but I have a couple of questions online, if you don't mind, before we move to a less depressing part of the webinar. And now we have some hope with the T word. The first one is, when people get tested for antibodies related to COVID-19, is it a specific test they're undertaking, or is it a generic one? Does anyone know the answer?
Yeah, I can have a stab at it. It really depends on the test. So, okay. I think maybe there are, in the popular media, the most well-known test would be some of these rapid diagnostic tests that involve, it's almost like a pregnancy test kit. It's a dipstick, the serum flows through this filter paper, and then various bands light up. Those have varying levels of both sensitivity and specificity, meaning that they can tell whether a person doesn't have the virus or does have the virus with varying levels of accuracy. The best, many of them can be pretty specific, but when tested in a very large population, they may not be sufficiently rigorous. The best sort of tests are done in the labs. They are what you call ELISA type of these tests, and they involve proteins that are specific to COVID-19. However, there's a big caveat about that. They detect antibodies that may not necessarily neutralize the COVID-19 virus. And so even though they detect the presence of antibodies that may bind to COVID-19, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are immune.
Sure.
But for the moment, this is the best guess that people have.
So
until they develop a T-cell test.
Thank you, Xinhong. Before we enlarge to whatever opportunity this disaster upon us is bringing about, I want to ask also an important question from someone else in the audience about previous versions of COVID or other SARS diseases. Have they been cured? If so, have we used plasma, for instance, and can we use that as a basis to work? Maybe Debbie and Catherine first, so that, because Xinhong, you have so much knowledge, I have to stop you for 2 seconds.
Maybe I can start to comment on that, Rajaa. So I think I would not like to be negative in this conversation, but there are indeed examples, like the first outbreak of SARS. There's a Middle East respiratory syndrome almost 10 years ago. And there were a couple of efforts, of course, to develop a vaccine, but all of them failed. And this is actually the same family of coronaviruses. So that's the negative point. Of course, the positive point is that a lot of learnings were made from these, let's call them brothers of the COVID-19. So, and some of the learnings are being applied in novel developments. But, that's a remark I would like to make, but these are examples of brothers or sisters of the current COVID, and they haven't been, they have not resulted, efforts have not resulted in effective vaccines there.
Okay, Catherine.
I see the audience is just slowed going down, so perhaps we need to go forward because people are quitting the webinar, so no, it's okay. But just as a joke, yes, we don't really know if we can have a vaccine in this category of viruses. I just told that we don't have a vaccine for HIV today, and it's a long-term research, more than 30 years now, so it can happen, but we need to have some hope too into our researchers and scientists, so we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Maybe on a positive note, maybe we need to redefine what is efficacy, because if a therapeutic vaccine or a prophylactic vaccine would mean that the disease would be less severe, that will already be a plus, of course.
There's a lot of programs ongoing with molecules or bio drugs to try to not to have a severe part of the disease. So it's very important to know that. And there's not only a prophylactic vaccine that can prevent the disease, it also can be some other treatments that allow us to be less ill, and it's not so bad, in fact, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And maybe the example of remdesivir, which is an already approved Gilead drug that is now a little bit repositioned for treatment of COVID patients, has obtained recently approval also in Europe. It's doing a new formulation, so making it inhalable. So this is already one step in the right direction towards a better care for patients.
Okay. I want to go back to Mark because we need to expand a little bit more. You mentioned the teleconsultations, telehealth, and there's a lot of other areas that are benefiting from the pandemic. Shouldn't say it like this, but that's the way it is, like insurance claims being streamlined thanks to technology, diagnostics being improved, tracking. Where do you see increased investor interest, Mark, in your areas, which are Europe and Israel?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of interest in digital therapeutics. So marrying digital with actual pills, you know. So we have a company called Happify based out of New York. They work with Sanofi and a bunch of the others, trying to figure out whether if you can put, you know, pills with digital therapy together. When you put them together, so to speak, in a shaker, is the output better? We see a lot of opportunities there as well. And,
okay.
Of course,
and
related to insurance is a big deal too.
That's true. Thank you. Catherine, you just closed the new digital health fund. Yeah. What is it going to focus upon, and why is France well positioned to, because you only invest in France, right?
France and Western Europe too, but mainly in France, in fact. The focus is quite broad because it's from the prevention to the digital therapeutic, just as Mark said. So it can be a lot of different things. Of course, every teleconsultation and a tele-expertise staff, a lot of artificial intelligence helping diagnosis or prognostics, a lot of solutions to optimize healthcare provider systems, to make it more efficient. a lot of different things, in fact. And for the COVID perspective, it's probably very opportunistic for these companies to go faster to the market, because with this big light on their solutions, and because everybody was locked down, we need to use these new tools, and it was a good way to remove the brakes that we.
No, inspiring comment, Catherine. I want to build on it, because this is also about how society is changing and our behavior as patients is changing. Where do you see this pandemic taking us, and where are the long-term trends that will actually influence our behavior, either through a push or pull strategy?
In fact, it's so during this crisis that there's a lot of decisions that people before to be patients and then have to make on their own with the data, the infos they have. We've got a lot of different information during this crisis, still the case, and it was sometimes right, sometimes false. We don't really know, and as a patient we need to decide if we put the children to the school or not, if we are going to work or not, for a lot of things for our regular life, and it will be probably it will continue probably, it not stop.
So, Xinhong, you're based in Silicon Valley, but you cover Asia also. What's happening there, because it's more advanced in terms of experience with COVID?
Yeah, I think that everything that Catherine said, Mark has said, I agree that basically what COVID-19 has basically done is accelerate the pace of macro trends that were already in place and taking place, right? This decentralization of operations, more working from home, the digitalization of various services. These are trends that have been in place and continue to accelerate. I think many governments have done well in responding to this crisis because of access to many of these tools. Singapore, for instance, employ many methods of social media and digital communication to give timely and up-to-date information to its citizens on the developments in the COVID-19 pandemic. That said, despite all the challenges that I've highlighted, we're actually optimistic that the technology will bring to bear solutions to the crisis that are these medical countermeasures will work. We will find a vaccine, potentially even one that is available at least in a limited fashion at the end of the year. We hope it's end of the year, or maybe middle of next year.
I'm not sure, Mark. I don't know if Mark agrees with you on that one, but that's the beauty of debate. We will hold you accountable to that. But speaking of which, talking Asia, Europe, we had as a host in a previous webinar the head of the Luxembourg Institute for Socioeconomic Research, and they were talking about all these apps that will help us maybe track potential symptoms, and there's an ethical layer that adds itself to the technological debate. So how do you guys see it on the European side? Maybe Debbie and Mark.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
No, men first in a female-led world, please.
Well, I think, Europe, we tend to worry, I think, a little too much about privacy, particularly in this debate. I mean, in my personal life, I've given away privacy because I use Google's products anyway, right? And so at the end of the way, I'm happy to trade privacy for health and safety. And I think Europe needs to move a little away from this kind of view that privacy is more important than anything. At the end, whether it's going to be an app on your phone or a chip that you embed into your arm, we are going to be traced. We are going to be tracked around the world, because the benefits of that tracking is going to far outweigh everything else. So I think, we're 5-10 years away from that really happening in a very powerful way. And it doesn't scare me in any way, shape, or form. I'm rather optimistic.
We will quote you on that one. And Debbie?
I agree with Mark. The Belgian government was a little bit reluctant using these apps, but we now see that a couple of them are being launched. So I agree, safety first, not privacy. Yeah.
I have a question from the audience, which is rather scientific. It's about the current discussion on the possible effect of chloroquine and a drug I never heard of, actually, called dimexatinib. dexamethasone, and other types molecule. Does this reflect a battle between big pharma, or is it real, medical debate that's going on? Who wants to take that one up? Debbie, you look intrigued.
Maybe I'll leave it to Xinhong for the more scientific explanation, but I think the clinicians are trying to use everything they could get their hands on to improve the health of their patients. So for some of the applications, indeed, there is some scientific rationale on using anti-inflammatory drugs. For other, there is less rationale, but yeah. Xinhong, leave the floor for you to additional comment.
Thanks, it was a great introduction. I mean, I think, frankly, the fastest medical countermeasure that we can bring to the problem is a repurposing of drugs that have already been approved. And this is the reason that there's been so much hope and hype around drugs such as hydroxychloroquine, as well as dexamethasone, which is a steroid. Unfortunately, most steroids have not been shown to be effective, but it seems like there's some effect for dexamethasone in some large controlled studies, but only for the most severe patients. And that's the challenge, right? Especially with many of the anti-inflammatories. You're sort of fighting this battle between needing to suppress the worst effects of the disease and suppress the so-called cytokine storm, the inflammation that occurs at maybe the most severe stages of the disease, with the need for some inflammation, because that's what helps to ward off the virus. So it's really a high wire act, but it's not just a debate between big pharma labs. This is actually, it's actually very heartening for the scientific community to see that many of the labs have really stepped up and brought their resources to muster on repurposing, using the computational methods to identify new drugs that have been approved and can potentially be adapted to be used for COVID-19. And so this means that the drugs have already been shown to be safe and effective in a certain context. And so then they can quickly be used for COVID-19 because we already know a lot about their chemistry and what whether or not they're going to be safe in the side effects of what if people take them. And then compared to a vaccine, the timeline of having a solution such as this could be much shorter. And if anything, if it doesn't, most of these are unlikely to prevent the disease. They are viewed as sort of a responsive type of treatments. So a vaccine is still preferable because it's something that would then be preventive. But if it's something that can reduce the severity of the disease and reduce mortality burden, I think that would be a very significant contribution, no doubt about that.
So we managed somehow to wrap it up on a positive note. Wow. So maybe we don't get a vaccine, but we get something. I don't see any more questions from the audience, so I'd like to just wrap it up with each of you and maybe the word of a conclusion or a hope or a message you'd like to give our audience. Because remember, the session can be replayed online and will stay online. Mark, people know you very well. Your interviews were very successful in the past. So do you want to start?
Yeah, I've been extremely impressed in the last 3 months how governments have responded here. Let's not forget, it's a global pandemic and they've responded extremely well. I'm an optimist in humanity, and I believe that we are racing towards solutions at speeds we've never known before. It just won't be the end of the year, but that we are going to find something, that we are going to find treatments in the short term, I'm 100% sure. So much resources is being put towards this that humanity will get out of this. No question in my mind.
Wonderful. I forgot to say, you like weird stuff, but you're an optimist.
I am.
Okay.
You need to be when you're an investor.
So, Catherine, but that is not surely the word of your conclusion.
No, I agree with Mark. I think we will go through that. For our perspective, it's a good opportunity to deploy our young fund into this digital health, which had the future on in. I think it's a good way to do differently, to do medicine differently, not at the place of, but differently. Probably we can do a lot of things remotely, and it won't be less efficacious. So it's a good opportunity, but of course we need to be cautious, and we need to have some energy and effort to go to a vaccine, because at the end it will be the.
But please make sure you share all the news of your fund so we can put it in our newsletter and share it with the audience, because I know you're very active in your pipeline. And same for Debbie. So we will share your news the near future, because you did your first closing? What do you want to tell the community?
I'm positive as well. I think people will need to be patient, need to be careful. But I think it will be a societal change. There will be a pre and a post-COVID era. And I think we need to learn and repeat the positive aspects that we've learned over this period.
Before I hear, sorry, thanks, Debbie. Before I hear Xinhong, there's an interesting question from the audience, actually, if you don't mind stepping up again, about the idea that are all these VC investors pulling their resources together and coordinating effort to avoid duplication and making sure that you coordinate your initiatives?
That's not what we do, Rajaa.
Okay, I will tell the audience that each to himself or herself.
I think there have been repositories, some led by and endorsed by the Gates Foundation and WHO to sort of try to pool IP. But I think we've had a pre-planning discussion about whether or not this would be a tractable or commercially viable solution, given the need to maintain some of this IP defensibility in terms of patents. And actually, like all the panelists, I've been really deep in this COVID-19 battle. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn so much about the virus, unfortunately, and to try to help our companies find solutions to it. And so actually, I'm very optimistic as well that we will find a solution, a medical countermeasure that will be effective, safe, and protective. We believe it will be our company, but I'm hopeful that others will also get there. And in view of that, our fund continues to take a long-term view, right? The problems that we have always been interested in working on, helping people live healthier, safer, cleaner, working about problems of environment, on the environment, clean energy, plastic disposal, on medicine. These are things that continue to be important. We will get through the pandemic. And as investors, VC investors with a long-term horizon, we continue to focus on looking for such companies. And our sixth fund, which we are still raising right now, a $500 million target fund, is focused on investing in these platforms of breakthrough technologies that address these large global problems that will continue to be important in a post-COVID era. And that's where we continue to set our sights.
Thanks, Xinhong. So keep us posted on progress of Emergex. And next time we do a debate, I'd like to hear more about how do we avoid being overwhelmed by the next new virus that may be upon us in the next decade. Because I think nobody has really addressed this. And to me, it remains the concern. But since we want to end on a positive note, I think we will be able to hear your news. Please share them with us. And let's do a follow-up maybe before the end of the year, if you all agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Cool.
And if we're lucky, we may even be able to do it live together in one room.
With an Emergex vaccine, I hope.
We hope so too.
With masks.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you.